But this program is designed for those interested in learning more about Alzheimer's, other dementias, and features information from dementia experts and perspectives from individuals living with dementia and care partners. Throughout this program, you'll hear the term care partner. Care partners are considered, care partners are used in preference over caregivers when the individual is living with Alzheimer's in the early stage. The individual may not need much assistance with daily tasks, but still benefits from support of family members and friends. Throughout our discussion, you'll have the opportunity to participate in the chat, and we'll give you all a few moments to enter your response after I read each prompt. So you'll have a little bit of time. Here you'll see our learning objectives, including comparing Alzheimer's and dementia. Oh, let's see, are you going to keep moving for me? There we go. Recognizing how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain, listing the risk factors of Alzheimer's disease, and identifying the stages of the disease. Alzheimer's is a global crisis, and you likely are hearing more and more about it in your personal lives and on the news. So as we get started, let's take a chance to test your knowledge. So worldwide, an estimated 55 million people are currently living with dementia. With that in mind, approximately how many Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's? I'll give you a few seconds. You're correct if you selected more than 6 million. This number is projected to reach nearly 13 million by 2050. Here's another one. About how many Americans provide unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's or other dementias? I'll give you a few seconds on this one. So if you chose 11 million, you're on there. Currently, more than 11 million Americans are providing unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's or another dementia. Alzheimer's impacts caregivers both at home and at work. More than 80% of care provided at home is delivered by family members, friends, or other unpaid caregivers. Over half of employed caregivers report having to go in late, take time off, or even quit their jobs altogether to help with caregiver demands. These caregivers provide more than 16 billion hours of care last year and valued at nearly $272 billion. As you can see, this disease takes personal impact on the individuals facing it, as well as a financial one. So let's learn a few more stats about the impact of Alzheimer's. Be aware that some audience members may be sensitive to this video as it highlights the serious impact and reality of this disease. So after seeing all those facts, this video is created by the Alzheimer's Association, but know that there are other organizations and resources that can assist with any of your concerns or questions regarding the statistics we just read. So let's start going into Alzheimer's and dementia. And you may recognize that it's used interchangeably. They often are related, but different. In this next section, we're going to discuss both Alzheimer's and dementia and how they're related. So before we begin, we're going to take another moment to test your knowledge. So Alzheimer's is a normal part of the aging process. Would you call this true or false? Okay. Alzheimer's disease is more than memory loss. It's progressive and fatal disease that kills nerve cells and tissue in the brain, affecting an individual's ability to remember, think, plan, and ultimately function. So if you chose false, you're doing good so far. Let's try another one. People younger than age 65 can get Alzheimer's. True or false? See a lot of truths in this chat. Let's see what our answer is. Fantastic job, everybody. While most individuals living with the disease are older adults, people younger than 65 can also develop Alzheimer's. This form of the disease is known as younger onset Alzheimer's, or sometimes called early onset. In some cases, people develop the disease in their 40s and 50s. Now let's watch a video of one of our experts, Dr. Heather Snyder, explaining how Alzheimer's and dementia are related.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So as we saw, there are many causes of dementia. However, Alzheimer's is the most common. There are numerous types of dementia. Each type has a different cause and symptoms. These listed are just a few classifications. A diagnosis of dementia requires further testing to identify the specific disease or condition causing the symptoms. So it's important to seek an accurate and early diagnosis. Let's hear from a care partner, Gail, about the importance of knowing her husband's diagnosis.
Certainly having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
Not wanting to cooperate today. So while there is not yet a cure for Alzheimer's, there is great value in seeking accurate diagnosis. This includes access to treatment options, opportunities to get resources and support, and more time to plan for the future. Dementia is a general term, for a collection of symptoms that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging, as we discussed. It is progressive and is a progressive brain disease. So next, we're going to look at what goes on in the brain when Alzheimer's disease is present. The brain is our most complex organ. It's also our most powerful, despite weighing only about 3 pounds. Let's hear from one of our experts about how Alzheimer's affects the brain.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
So let's discuss the risk factors. Everyone with a brain is at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and there are a few known factors that increase a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Let's see if you know which one is the most common. Here's another time to test your knowledge and participate in the chat. Which of these options do you think is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease? Genetics, family history, or age? Okay. Seeing in the chat, a lot of people are bouncing back and forth between age and genetics. If you chose age, you got it right. As mentioned, these are all known risk factors. However, age is the greatest risk factor. After age 65, the risk of developing Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years. More than a third of people aged 85 or older are living with this disease. Alzheimer's disease is marked by a specific brain change that results in clinical changes in an individual's experience. That is changes in memory, thinking, or even reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal, as we discussed. So as we discuss, age is the greatest risk factor. We look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, we mentioned Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also known as a risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are 2 categories. This could potentially be potentially involved: risk genes or deterministic genes. Risk genes increase an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantees that the individual will develop Alzheimer's. In addition to the main risk factor for the general population, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women are at higher risk for Alzheimer's. Research shows that Black Americans are about twice as likely as white Americans to have Alzheimer's or another dementia. And Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely. The reason for these differences is not well understood, but researchers believe the higher rates of vascular disease in these groups may also put them at a greater risk for developing Alzheimer's. Women are more likely than men to develop this disease, and it's likely because they live much longer than men. Nearly 4 million American women are living with the disease today. making them more likely to develop the Alzheimer's disease as we do live longer. However, longevity and lower death rates can only partially explain this difference. Researchers are exploring how genetic differences between men and women may impact this disease risk. So as we're looking at the screen and we're looking at key differences that are significant between each ethnicity, you'll see Black caregivers are more likely to provide more than 40 hours of care per week than white caregivers. Also, are more likely to care for someone with dementia than white caregivers. Then you'll see that 69%, that Black dementia caregivers are 69% less likely to use respite care services compared to white caregivers. Even though there are these differences, you will notice that there are many cultural factors and individualized factors that may impact the differences between these groups. Next, you'll be able to see that with discrimination being considered a barrier to Alzheimer's and dementia, that these populations have also reported discrimination with seeking healthcare. And it's a significant difference across each ethnicity, as you can see. To summarize, Alzheimer's disease involves the failure of nerve cells, the exact cause of which is still uncertain. However, research has identified risk factors that increase the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. Age being the greatest risk factor, family history known as a risk factor, having a parent or sibling with the disease increases that individual's risk. Recognizing those two types of genes that are associated with Alzheimer's, risk genes and deterministic genes, and Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women are at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's. So let's move on to discussing the stages of Alzheimer's disease. Oh, I'm sorry. And here is just a summary of what we just talked about. Guess I just need to slow down a little bit. So no two individuals experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. So let's hear from a few individuals describing what it's like living with dementia. Again, the individuals we just heard from living in the early stage of the disease will differ. Symptoms worsen over time for everyone. However, people progress through stages of Alzheimer's at different rates as their abilities change. On average, a person living with Alzheimer's can live 4 to 8 years after their diagnosis, but can live as long as even 20 years, depending on other factors.
I'm like an overachiever. And when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and just changed it last week. And you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
Next, we'll hear about Phil.
Math, I can't do something. I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways, that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with words, which I've dealt with words my entire life, you know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
And lastly, we'll hear from Tom.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive, and I'm finding that I'm forgetting more, and they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor, and so that becomes a little disconcerting at times, to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
So the progression of Alzheimer's disease from brain changes that are unnoticeable to a person, the brain changes that cause problems with memory and eventually physical disability are classified as Alzheimer's disease continuum. On this continuum, there are 3 broad phases shown on this slide. In teal, you'll see, and in orange and in purple. The first phase is called asymptomatic. In this phase, there may be changes in the brain long before a person begins to have symptoms or gets a diagnosis. As the disease progresses, the person will begin to experience mild symptoms, but will still be able to independently perform most activities in everyday living. In this phase, the person may be diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment or MCI. In the graphic shown on this slide, MCI is an early stage of Alzheimer's disease, meaning hallmark changes in the brain, such as amyloid buildup, are present at the time. MCI can develop for multiple reasons, and individuals living with MCI may go on to develop dementia due to Alzheimer's. Others will not. In the third phase, people who do develop dementia due to Alzheimer's will experience more serious changes in memory, thinking, and behavior. This phase is further broken down into stages called mild, moderate, and severe, sometimes referred to as early, middle, or late. These stages reflect the degree to which symptoms interfere with the person's everyday activities. It's important to understand that the stages of Alzheimer's are general, and because each person living with the disease has a unique experience, we can't always neatly place any individual into one specific stage. In fact, some people may exhibit symptoms that overlap stages. However, the stages do not allow them to gain a general understanding of the progression of the disease. As Alzheimer's progresses, the individual's behavior will change, as does the role of a caregiver. These stages can help caregivers prepare for what to expect and understand how to best respond. So to recap, the 3 broad phases of Alzheimer's disease is asymptomatic, mild cognitive impairment or MCI due to Alzheimer's disease, and dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. The dementia phase is further broken down into 3 stages, mild, moderate, and severe, as we mentioned. No 2 individuals experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. While symptoms worsen over time, the people progress through stages at different rates as their abilities change. Now, because everyone experiences Alzheimer's different, these treatments work in varying degrees and are not effective for everyone. We encourage people who are interested in learning more about treatments for themselves, a family member, or a friend to have a conversation with a healthcare provider or professional is always encouraged. Lastly, on this slide, you'll see a few resources that may be beneficial for each individual's personal needs. Please keep in mind that these resources are to fit individualized needs. However, there are many different resources that are available. No one should face Alzheimer's or another dementia alone. There are people who understand and are willing to support each individual's specific needs. And actually, before I move forward, if anyone has any questions about any of these resources or wants anything sent to them, please be sure to let us know and we'll have that sent to you. And the inclusion statement on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association. At the Alzheimer's Association, we believe that engaging diverse perspectives is critical to achieving health equity, meaning that all communities have a fair and just opportunity for early diagnosis and access to risk reduction and quality care. Underrepresented and underserved communities are disproportionately impacted by Alzheimer's and dementia, and yet are less likely to be diagnosed, less likely to be recruited to participate in research, and less likely to have access to care and support services. This is unacceptable and must change. We are leading the way by developing strategic partnerships with trusted national and local organizations to create a pathway to greater health equity, mission engagement, and inclusion for everyone. We're building an organizational culture of understanding while pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, throughout education and policies. The association is committed to providing all communities with resources and education to realize our vision of a world without Alzheimer's and other dementias. Any questions that may come up between now or 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, there is always a helpline at 1-800-272-3900.